Okay, this is Phil here. Jack says that I have not been interviewed on any of our gatherings, and he'd like some words. Since he's the one that produces those wonderful DVDs of our get-togethers, I do feel a sense of obligation. Actually, we don't have access to a video camera, but Joy is here now and brought her camera, so we'll see what we can do. I wrote down some memories, and it seemed kind of long-winded, but didn't know how to cut it back. Since I now have reached the age of 80, it gives me license to ramble on and on. I read that somewhere. At the last reunion, my days were limited, and I wasn't even aware that you were having a reunion. But my time here has been extended. It's now October 2007, and I'm having a fairly good quality of life. I do have a very clear memory of my early life and spending much time at Grandma's house. This was the big farmhouse that they had built. Uni tells a story about how a visiting photographer came one day to take a picture of their house, and he said it was such a homey house. Grandma thought he said homely, and she was mad at him. Since I never saw a photo of the house, he either didn't get to take it or Grandma wasn't buying. That house had a really big kitchen, and life pretty much revolved around that. Grandpa was well into his disease when I knew him, and I only remember that he'd sit at the table. Grandma would pour his coffee in his saucer, and then he'd drink out of that. We'd usually have cake and cookies that Grandma made, but sometimes we'd have store-bought. There was a cookie that had a hole in the middle and a little edge around the hole, there was a cookie that had a hole in the middle, and Uncle Louie always told us that if we ate the hole, we could die. And Uncle Louie had lots of stories like that. So I was very careful and left a little edge around the hole, which Uncle Louie finally polished off. Wouldn't you think a kid would eventually figure that out? But I never did. I always made that little edge around there. Mostly my memories are just snippets of this and that. Grandma said that in Germany, Grandpa's family celebrated Christmas in a big way. I think that's where Christmas trees started, isn't it? In Germany? I think so. I remember one Christmas being there with just the two of them, and they lit real candles on the tree. That was an awesome sight, but now I think how dangerous that was. Uni said they kept a pail of water nearby to douse the tree in the event it would start a fire. Those were trees that they would get off the land anywhere, and then they would dry out. It really was dangerous.
Yeah.
They did enjoy simple pleasures. Grandma loved to watch the kittens play in the evenings, and good old Lad, the dog, was a constant companion. Grandma used to make him a birthday cupcake in the lid of one of those old mason jars, and he'd gulp it down without even tasting it. You know, he must have had several birthdays in a year, because I remember that happening more times, so I suppose every once in a while they celebrated.
He liked to celebrate.
I think Roy read the story about how Lad and Uni shared the ice cream cones that Uncle Louie would buy for her when they went into town. Uncle Louie would have to go into town sometimes, and he'd take Uni along, and when they'd get there, he'd buy her an ice cream cone, and on the way home, Lad would sit next to Uni. She was just a little girl then, and then Uni take a lick, and then Lad would take a lick. After Grandma died, Grandma used to come to visit us for the day. Old Grant, the horse, would pull the wagon. Uni said that Grant had one speed and that was slow, and that's probably true. But that was fine, because then when I went back with Grandma, she'd stay for the day, and then in the evening I could go back with her. And then we'd take, this horse and that wagon, and then I could stay with her until Sunday afternoon when they'd come to the farm, to their farm, and pick me up. That was wonderful. Actually, that's one of my happiest memories. We wouldn't go through Cedar Grove then. We'd go over the viaduct. I don't know if you remember the viaduct. It was kind of a different.
Where was it?
You were little. It was up over, and you could hear Grant as he would go over there. It would go.
Yeah.
And and then Grandma and I would look up the stars and we'd talk things over, and life didn't get any better than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was wonderful. And because I'm so old, I remember the weddings of your parents, except for Uncle Louie and Melita. When Evan and Chris were married, I was their flower girl. I think I was about 5 then. And that was such a grand and glorious event. Then when Nori and John were married, everybody thought they were such a handsome couple, and they really were. In later years, when Nori was at Pine Haven, I went to visit her, and she had wedding picture of them sitting there. And I said, oh, you're such a good-looking couple. You look like movie stars. She smiled, and she was, really not. Again, she was along in her disease. She said, yeah, me and Clark Gable. And I wouldn't have thought she'd have known who Clark Gable was. The Taranvi wedding stands out because they had velvet dresses. Velvet, can you imagine?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I've ever felt velvet before, but I did then, and then I keep stroking that dress, and I bet I had handprints all over that thing. And when Uni and Fred were married, I was her maid of honor.
Wow, you made the rounds.
I made the rounds. And Uni and Grandma and I went to Milwaukee to shop for dresses. And every shop we went into, Grandma would tell the clerk that her daughter was marrying a second lieutenant.
Oh.
And Uni was getting a little embarrassed about that. But then we just decided to let her go. She thought they needed that information. That was fine. She could brag when the occasion arose,
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I do remember each of the cousins and sisters except Ruth when they were born. Actually, I even remember Carol. When Carol was born, they took me out to Grandma's house, and Nori told the story of how then they didn't live very far from the beach. I think about a mile. So they would often take me to the beach then, and when they came back to the house, they found out that I had another sister. And they told me that, and I said, what? Another one? We just had one. Ruth was, I think, 18 months older. So I thought, this is just kind of going pretty far. We're just keep having babies. We saw quite a lot of the Ackerman kids as they grew up, and Ruth, Carol, Carl, and Ron were similar in age. Roy and Judy came a little after, and I'm sure they got in on all the stuff. But there were many hijinks in the Hemo, and looking back, it's amazing they all ended up in one piece because they performed some daredevil stunts. If Dad had known some of the stuff that they did and what they told later, because your grandpa was so, so worried
he was
about
careful.
them. Yeah, so careful. And then Linda and Jan are the same age. In fact, I think they were the same class in school. And then it was all dolls and kitty cats. The Croonins came out in the summer, and what I recall about Warren Lee was that poor baby had to wait until the exact minute for his bottle. It was very precise about everything. If it was due at 2 p.m. and it was 1:45, he had to wait until it was exactly 2 p.m. By the time Cal came along, things seemed more relaxed. Aunt Eve always said Cal looked like he belonged to Aunt Lid's family. He has very dark hair. Haven't seen Cal for years and years, but on the last video that Jack sent, he does look different. His hair is really dark. He doesn't look like Warner. So maybe he did belong in our family. And also Cal told about how he didn't have a name until he was born because they were expecting a girl. Well, I remember Aunt Eve saying that if she had a girl, when she was expecting Gwen, that she was going to name her Gwendolyn because it sounded so musical. Aunt Eve was very musical. She even played, they would have movies, silent movies of course, in the town hall, and she would play the piano, but she would play it according to what was going on the screen. She's really very talented. We also got to see the Claerbout kids a lot. When I was a teenager, I took care of Jack for a short time in the summer, and he really was an easy kid to take care of. The only problem was that one day Nori wanted me to take him to the barber to get his hair cut, and he just refused. He wasn't going, no barber. And I mentioned that to him a couple of years ago, and he says he still doesn't like to get his hair cut. He also had some airplane cards which showed pictures of planes on the front, and on the back were all sorts of facts about those planes. And he wanted to talk about this a lot with me. But you can imagine, if he was about 4, I was 14. It didn't really interest me a whole lot. Lauren and Jana were really sweet little girls, and they just did everything they were supposed to. Just perfect little girls. They were involved in all sorts of things, and Aunt Nori was involved in it too. And I don't know how she did that all, because she worked. She was a career woman long before that was thing to do. But yet she managed everything. And when Russ was born, he was so tiny. He was a preemie. And we'd go to see him, and Mother would say that, if Helen hadn't been a nurse, they'd never have raised him. They said like his little arms and legs were like little matchsticks. He really was so tiny.
Wait on, I didn't know that.
But then Ray and Paul came along, and they were just normal. And I saw a lot of them because I worked at Wood at the Veterans Hospital. And then Helen would have Margie and I over for dinner. And those kids were so well behaved. And Helen was such a good cook. And the house was always spotless. You just sort of, like you stepped into a Norman Rockwell painting or something. Ray said it wasn't always like that, but it was that way when we came. And then Uni began her family. And when Chris was born, Uni wrote about, I was in nursing school when Chris was born. And she wrote about this wonderful baby and how cute she was. And I just thought it's a new mom bragging, but Chris really was a cutie. And then Joyce came along, and she was full of energy and good cheer. Jeff arrived just 6 months before our daughter Joy was born. And so it continues. You're born in the same year, but then we ended one generation.
Interesting.
Yeah. Looking back, we had no big problems, upsets, or unsavory characters in our group. You know, we really didn't. That's pretty remarkable. It may not make for such an interesting history, but I'll choose that any day. It's sort of like Roy said at the last reunion. When you were in that group, you just felt loved and being a part of the whole family. I have nothing deep or profound to pass on to you. You would think I would after all these years, but I don't. But you all seem to have found your way on your own. Grandma Ackerman definitely would have been proud of how you all turned out. And we all should thank our lucky stars that the stork dropped us, where he dropped us into this family. And now, Jack, you asked for a few words, and look what you got.